Welcome to the RoomMed dialogue with Mohammad Javad Zarif, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Welcome back, Minister, and
Good to be with you.
Thanks for having accepted this dialogue, for which I will be joined by Elie Geranmaye of the European Council of Foreign Relations.
Good to be with both of you.
Thank you. Minister, in our previous dialogue last July, we talked about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Iran. And since then, both Europe and Iran have been experiencing another wave. How do you see the situation today in your country, and on which country do you expect the consequences of the pandemic to destabilize more?
Well, I think the situation in Iran is pretty bad, with our third wave hitting us during the autumn season, where we have other viruses coming like influenza. Our medical personnel are doing their best. We have extremely competent medical professionals, but the load has been too heavy for too long, and it is exhausting. Unfortunately, we're suffering from something more than the rest of the world is, and that is an economic war. This is way beyond restrictions. The United States even prevents us from using our own money in different countries to pay COVAX for the vaccine. If they say otherwise, they're simply lying. We've been trying, our Ministry of Health has been trying, our central bank has been trying to transfer money we have in billions in other countries to WHO for COVAX, and we haven't had much success. That has hampered our effort to fight the disease, and that, in every definition of the word, is a crime against humanity being committed by the Trump administration in its last days.
Apart from Iran, where would you expect in the region the pandemic to have most dangerous and scaring consequences?
Well, in Yemen, we have been witnessing very severe situation in all humanitarian aspects, not just the pandemic, but in terms of food supply, in terms of medicine. Yemen is undergoing another siege, which prevents the Yemenis from receiving medicine and food supplies. And unfortunately, the same gang that is preventing Iran, I used to call them the B team, some of them are gone, but the same gang of those committing crimes against humanity are preventing Yemen from having access to food and medicine as well.
When we met 5 months ago, we did not know President Trump would leave.
Do we know now? He lost it.
No, I was saying might leave, but at this point I said would leave. The new administration might bring some changes in the MENA region, also for Iran. Biden has said he would return to the nuclear agreement, but also said he would extend its duration and would like to deal with some other issues. Are you ready to engage in those negotiations? And what if other issues include the Iran missile program and or Iran's role in the region?
Well, let's take these issues separately. First, on the United States rejoining the nuclear agreement. The United States walked out of the nuclear agreement, but did not walk out of the United Nations. It has responsibilities, obligations as a UN member, as a Security Council member, And there is a Security Council Resolution 2231, which the United States must observe as a permanent member of the Security Council. The United States has been in grave breach of that resolution because Trump administration has been a rogue regime. Now, if President-elect Biden wants to continue to be a rogue regime, then he can continue to be asking for negotiations to implement its commitments. So the United States has commitments under the resolution which has to implement. It's not in a position to set conditions for that. You do not set conditions to stop at the red light. If the previous car passed the red light, that's a violator. That's not a law-abiding citizen. You're not supposed to follow that. The United States must stop. The United States must cease its violations of international law. It doesn't require any negotiations. Going to the other issues that you raised, we will not renegotiate a deal which we negotiated. The deal was about give and take. It wasn't about one side asking and the other side giving. The fact is that the United States and other European partners started with 20 plus 10. They wanted 20 plus 10 years of restrictions. Iran started with none. We agreed somewhere in the middle, 10 plus few more. This was the subject of 2 years of negotiations. It will never be renegotiated, period, because that's a sign, a clear case of bad faith. If you want to negotiate something and if you didn't get anything you wanted, you would want to renegotiate. The third issue, the issue of missiles and the issue of regional security were deliberately put aside by all sides, not because they gave a concession to Iran, but because the other sides were not prepared to end their malign behavior in these areas. Look at the issue of weapons. Last year, the West sold to the Persian Gulf more weapons than it sold to any other part of the world. Over $100 billion worth of weapons were sold to this region. Is the West ready to stop this malign behavior? The West supported the war in Yemen. The West supported the annexations, not officially, but in fact, the annexations of Palestinian lands. The West supported Israeli terrorism. Why Israel is committing acts of terror against Iran, including the terror of our nuclear scientists last week, inside Iran, without condemnation, without consequences from the West. So is the West ready to stop its malign behavior in our region? Because they were not ready to deal with that, we decided to put those issues aside. When they are ready to deal with those problems of their own malign behavior in the region, when the United States, when UK, when France, when Germany are ready to put an end to their malign support for a terrorist regime, for violations of human rights in Yemen, for cracking down on people, for dismemberment of a journalist in Turkey by their very close ally, Saudi Arabia, then they can start talking about other things. As long as they're not able to put up, they have to shut up.
As you know, in the tradition of dialogue of MED, we will host tomorrow the High Representative for European Union, Borrell, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, of Spain, of Italy. And so we will raise some of the topic that you have addressed now with them as well tomorrow.
Yeah, ask them, are they willing to put a limit on defense spendings at the same level as Iran? Are they willing to send the same amount of weapons to Saudi Arabia, UAE, other countries in the region, to the level that we are making? If they're willing to do that, then they can start talking about Iran.
Yeah, and tomorrow we will also have the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and so we will have another.
Ask
view
him
on-
if he is willing to bring his country's military expenditure to a sixth, to a seventh. They're spending $67 billion on arms. Last year, our total military budget was $10 billion. Are they willing to cut their military spending to almost 15% if they want to equate with us?
Let me move to my third question before I turn to Ellie. Again, since we met last July, something else has happened. We have also seen the normalization of relations between Israel and countries in the Gulf. What will change for Iran? Will the new alliance act as a pressure group on the new administration vis-à-vis the negotiations?
Well, during the previous administration, they also tried. It's not a secret that a number of actors, both domestic inside the United States as well as actors from our region, did in fact try to impede the negotiations, even traveling to Geneva while we were to Vienna while we were negotiating, and asking John Kerry to go to the airport to meet them. So I'm sure they will continue to do that. But the question that I want to ask our neighbors is that, are they prepared to fight Israel's fight with Iran? Do they want to be the scene of Israeli atrocities against Iran? We are their neighbors. We will be in this region together. I do not believe that they want to allow Israel to bring the fight here.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. As usual, you are extremely clear and frank in our dialogue, and we appreciate that. And as I said, we will listen to other reaction and views tomorrow. But let me now turn to Ellie for a round of questions. Please, Ellie.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Salam. Thank you, Minister, for your time. I wanted to focus questions on the immediate coming months ahead and some of the important national security issue questions for Iran. My first question to you is, as you've alluded, had the recent assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. There's been a fallout in the domestic landscape from this, and we have seen that Iran's parliament yesterday passed a legislation which requires the government to increase enrichment activities and potentially in the coming months restrict the access of international monitors. Can you unpack for us the domestic landscape at the moment regarding the nuclear agreement, and also what happens next with respect to this piece of legislation?
Well, as you know, the JCPOA provides for Iran not implementing in whole or in part its obligations in return for the other side not implementing, or in reprisal or in retaliation or as a remedy for whichever you want to use it. But because JCPOA was negotiated based on mutual mistrust, we put in place mechanism that if one side does not live up to its obligations, the other side can in fact reduce its commitments or withdraw altogether. Now, what Iran has done is, since the United States withdrew from the agreement and imposed heavy restrictions on Iran, President Trump has called it economic war. He called it several times economic war, which is a crime against humanity because he is targeting ordinary Iranian citizens. The Europeans have not been able to implement their part of the deal. The Europeans say that we are in full compliance. They're simply not, because compliance with the JCPOA, based on the letter of the JCPOA, is not simply passing a couple of legislations or suspending or removing a couple of legislations. Implementation, compliance means that they have to have effects for these actions. And we don't see an effect. We don't see any European company in Iran. We do not see any European country buying oil from Iran. We do not see any country, for that matter, buying oil from Iran. We do not see any European bank even prepared to send us our money. One of the members of JCPOA has a court order to pay Iran several hundred million pounds, but they are refusing to do that because they say that they cannot transfer the money because of US sanctions. So the Europeans cannot claim that they are implementing JCPOA. So we are within our rights to reduce our commitment, and that has been the decision taken by the government over a year ago. The government was not in support of the action by the parliament. We believe that the national sentiments and national sensitivities are very serious, and we believe that the murder, assassination, terrorist attempt act against one of our respected scientists, Dr. Fakhrizadeh, was an act of international aggression which had to be condemned. We are still waiting for Europe, for some European members, certainly the E3, to condemn it. We appreciate that some have, but the E3 have failed to condemn a clear act of terrorism against Iran. So this is where we stand. There is a legislation in the parliament. We did not like it, and we made it very clear. But like any democracy, when that legislation goes through all the legal procedures, and it has almost completed those legal procedures, constitutional procedures, it becomes law. It becomes an obligation for the government to implement it. And we will implement it because it is the law of the land. Now, it's not irreversible. The title of the legislation is to restore Iranian rights and to make sure that sanctions are removed. The Europeans and the United States can, in fact, come back into compliance with JCPOA, and not only this law will not be implemented, but in fact, our actions that we have taken in light of paragraph 36 of JCPOA will be rescinded. That is, we will go back to full compliance. The remedy is very easy, and the remedy is foreseen in the JCPOA. Go back to full compliance, normalize Iran's economic relations with the rest of the world, stop making new conditions, stop making outrageous demands, and as soon as you do that, as soon as you come back to the letter of JCPOA, let alone its spirit, come back to the letter of JCPOA, and we will immediately do that. In the meantime, the legislation by the parliament, if it becomes the law of the land, we will implement it. We have no other option. That is the case in any democracy.
Thank you, Minister. There is an upcoming meeting of the current JCPOA partners coming up later this month. In advance of that, we have heard a lot of comments from your administration regarding possible roadmaps for diplomacy ahead in terms of the incoming Biden administration. And yesterday, President-elect Joe Biden made a series of comments that indicates that his administration will look to first rejoin the nuclear deal and then build upon it. I wondered, with this upcoming joint commission, do you have any expectations, particularly from European countries, Russia and China? Is there a prospect that the current members will welcome the incoming Biden administration to rejoin and stabilize the nuclear deal in the coming months ahead?
Well, it will certainly be a topic of discussion for the JCPOA Joint Commission. Obviously, the Joint Commission has an agenda, and they deal with their own agenda, which includes a lot of nuclear issues and a lot of sanctions lifting issues which they need to deal with. And I'm sure this would be an important topic for them to consider. What I have laid out is very clear. The United States must implement, without precondition, its obligations under the JCPOA as required by Security Council Resolution 2231. It doesn't have to be a member of JCPOA to implement obligations under Article 25 of the Charter as a member of the United Nations, let alone a permanent member of the Security Council. Then Iran, once the United States implements its obligations, because we were not the country that withdrew. It is the United States that withdrew. It has to show its good faith. It has to show its bona fides. We have proven in our bona fides in 15 consecutive reports of the IAEA, including five, that were issued after President Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA. So our bona fides are very clear. The United States needs to re-establish its bona fides. It never established it. It needs to even establish its bona fides for the first time, and then Iran will go back to full compliance. I'm repeating, full compliance with JCPOA, with or without this new legislation, because this new legislation is intended to bring the Europeans and the United States back into compliance. Once they are in compliance, the intent of the legislation is served, and we will be meeting our obligations. Then the United States can rejoin the JCPOA. Members of the JCPOA will have to make a decision on how this can be done and what steps need to be taken. As I've said before, JCPOA or any international agreement is not a revolving door. It's not that you can come in, impose restrictions on others, benefit from the privileges of membership, and then all of a sudden decide to leave and inflict $250 billion of damage on the Iranian people and enormous lives. The number of lives that we have lost during this pandemic because of the fact that we did not have access to the best quality of medicine, because we did not have access to financial resources that were necessary for us to impose, for instance, a full lockdown, because a full lockdown requires a lot of resources. Iran is a rich country. We were able to put a full lockdown, but we were not able to do that only, and I stress only, because of US restrictions and US economic war. So the United States is responsible for all these damages that it has imposed on the Iranian people, most of it irreparable. We will have to be satisfied that this is not repeated.
Thank you, Minister. Let me pose my final question to you, and it takes us back to a conversation you were having earlier with Paolo. There are a lot of questions being asked about what would keep Iran locked into a process of diplomacy and negotiations with the West if the United States does indeed take the move to ease all of the sanctions that have been imposed since May 2018. A question I often get asked by many officials is, how do we know Iran will continue to engage with the West on other critical areas of issues and contentious issues? What is your answer to that? Because this does seem to create a sequencing problem of how both the United States, the Europeans, and Iran will look to re-engage in the process of sanctions easing, hopefully in the coming months.
Well, it's not that difficult. The United States can go back to the noon of January 20th, 2016, and we will go back to the noon of January 20th, 2016, when this disaster happened to the international community. That's not a difficult thing to do. Iran has always been, Iran's proposals on these various issues have been on the table. Our proposal for the Hormuz peace endeavor has been on the table. Unfortunately, it is the blank check that the United States has given to its allies and its clients in the region that has prevented restoration of peace and stability in our region. We have extended an open hand to all our neighbors in this region to start engaging. And I believe those members of P4+1 who have actually raised the same suggestion, like Russia, like China, they've suggested that Iran and its neighbors should start talking together, should start engaging with each other. I think the countries in the region, once they understand that there will not be a blank check from President Trump and company, then they will accept to start talking to Iran, to start addressing mutual grievances. Believe me, Iran has huge grievances about past and present. From the time that they engage in supporting Saddam Hussein to gas our people with chemical weapons, to shower our people with missiles, to the present that they are financing every terrorist organization that is operating in Iran. Huge grievances by Iran, but we have an open eye and open ear, and we can listen to their grievances. But we suggest to them that we should all be forward-looking. We should look at the future. We should discuss the future. We should talk about what we can do together in order to save our region from a disaster that has been caused by 4 years of Trump administration.
Thank you very much for your time, Minister. I will now pass the floor back to my colleague.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie. Minister, as you know, the goal of Rome-Med dialogue is to move beyond turmoil and try to draft a positive agenda. We have been struggling in the last 5 years on this goal, of course. But let me try to close on a positive note. Last week, Iran released a British-Australian academic in prison since 2018. Can we expect more on this issue, which, as you know, draws a lot of attention internationally?
Well, I can tell you categorically that yes, we can. In fact, there are several proposals by Iran on the table. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not have a standing in Iranian courts, but we will gain standing once there is a possibility for exchange. I have suggested a global exchange of prisoners, of Iranian prisoners, because as you know, last week we also received, of course in 2 different channels, but we received 3 Iranian prisoners. We can always engage in that. It is in the interest of everybody. There are Iranian prisoners in Europe illegally. There are Iranian prisoners in the United States illegally. There are Iranian prisoners in Africa who have been ordered by the court to be released, but because of pressure from the United States, they continue to be in detention. All of them can go back to their families, and Iran is ready to reciprocate. We can do it tomorrow. We can even do it today.
Thank you, Minister. Last time in July, you told everybody that you will not be minister next year after the election. So, in a sense, this could be, as a minister, not as a person, I hope, your last Rome-Med dialogue. Can I ask you, in the last 2 minutes we have, to address the Rome-Med community, which is growing year after year all over the world, with a message of hope for the region?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you, Paolo, and the Med Dialogue for giving me this opportunity, and throughout last few years giving me the opportunity to participate and to exchange my ideas with you. I think we need to realize that times have changed, that today we either live together or die together. We cannot live at the expense of each other. We need to make a cognitive transformation. Deterrence doesn't make sense anymore. You cannot have security at the expense of insecurity of others. We need to change our paradigm. We see, some call this realistic paradigm, the one that we have been living under. But is it realistic to have so many people killed? Is it realistic to have such huge humanitarian catastrophes and continue to stick to this so-called realistic paradigm? I think we can change. I think the global situation has changed. We live in a changed global environment. We live in a global environment where the human person, human being, an individual has become a global actor. An individual can have a global impact. So that brings with it responsibility. that brings with it a need to have hope for the future, but at the same time to work for the future.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ellie. It was a real pleasure. And now we move to the next dialogue. Thank you again.
Thank you, Paolo, and thank you, Ellie. Bye.